Alright everybody, episode 1, the official premiere of the Combat Exchange is here. This is Tom Albano along with Zain Bando. And Zain, it is Super Bowl weekend, and more importantly for us in the MMA space, it is UFC 312 weekend. Card isn't the strongest, but we got a couple of very interesting title fights, really anticipated title fights, including a big rematch, a fighter whose hype train I've been on for like the longest time, defending his title in the main event. And then we've got a co-main event of, well, I would say call it epic proportions, considering the two women who are battling it out in the featured contest there, the co-main event. And then the featured fights, I mean, not looking anything great, but also a lot of news to talk about. Hope your week has been well, Zain. Been a couple weeks since we taped our pilot, but here we are, and I can't wait for this.
Yeah, I mean, things have been going relatively decent, just cranking on a lot of different things, both in the collegiate athletics and the MMA space. I think my content is only, I guess, rapidly growing on a daily basis. So it's nice that I was able to take a little bit of time out in order to do this today. And I mean, I guess the most I can say is even though UFC 312 isn't the strongest card, I think it's only fitting that we start, I guess, this new venture with one of your favorite fighters headlining is this weekend's pay per view. Considering that in our old era, if you will, you were just as excited for the first one as I'm sure you are now for the rematch. So it's very I it's kind of poetic in a sense that episode one is on the days before eve of not just the Super Bowl, of course, but UFC 312 taking place in Sydney, Australia. And I just want to mention too, it's very bizarre in my opinion, and I'm sure you more than likely agree with this, that we're going into a UFC pay per view fight weekend, if you will, and usually there's a ton of anticipation around these. At least there has been for the last couple of months, and maybe it's just the backdrop of some of the other fights in the card just not being the most compelling. But to me, you would think Sean Strickland essentially going back to enemy territory to fight Dricus du Plessis is a big deal. I think from a relative global scope of things, it unfortunately really isn't. So it's good to know that we are shining light on a fight that I think should be getting more buzz, intrigue, and attention. And this is a rematch that's needed to happen for a while, and now it's finally happening. So, and also I think it just adds to all the intrigue. You got Nasruddin Imavov winning last weekend against Israel Adesanya in a very changing of the guard type middleweight fight. Then of course you got Hamza Chimaev out there trolling Sean Sean Strickland on Instagram in recent days. So if you want to talk about absolute cinema from a 185-pound perspective, I think we have it this week and then some. So
Fair enough. So you know what? Let's just jump right into it. Make sure all of you out there like and subscribe, by the way. Follow us on our social medias at Combat Exchange. Combat Exchange with an X, no E, on X, and then on Instagram at The Combat Exchange. You saw our Twitters and our personal Twitters on the name bars beforehand, but let's just jump right into it. You want to talk about 312? We've got a big middleweight title fight, big middleweight title rematch here between Dricus du Plessis, the man whose hype train I've been on since he got onto the EFC scene in the mid 2010s.
I was gonna say you've been on the DDP hype train since probably before most people.
Since I entered MMA media.
Well, no, not just since before you entered MMA media, but probably most people in the entire world outside of South Africa. So
absolutely, thank you to my time at Fight Sports for that. Taking on Sean Strickland. Obviously, rematch of what we saw at UFC 297 in January of last year. It was an interesting kind of fight, and it was one that you, I, and Pat Dana actually rewatched together several months ago prior to Dricus's title defense against Israel Adesanya.
We sure did.
We looked at this fight, and, people are rewatching this fight, Zain, and what I'm commonly seeing is, they thought Dricus won in the moment, and then they're switching to Strickland, or they thought that Strickland won and they're sticking with Strickland, or they thought that Dricus won, they're sticking with Dricus. I'm seeing a lot of inconsistency in terms of how people are viewing this fight. I mean, I looked back at the MMA media scores on the website for MMA media scores, and basically I saw the split there, and you
Mm-hmm.
still see the split, when anybody is talking about that
Right.
fight. I still have no idea how a 49-46 for Strickland got in the middle of all of that, when meanwhile all across the board you saw 48-47s going one way or another. I know when we watched the fight the first time, it was close. I think I had it 3-2 DDP. And then when we rewatched it alongside Pat, I think I kept it the same, if not maybe more of a 4-1
Well,
for DDP.
if you recall, I was stuck in the if you recall, and I still am. I'm stuck in the middle between a 47-47 draw and a 48-47 DDP win. And actually, I was just looking at the scorecards of this fight right before we were recording. I was doing a preview for one of the outlets I work for, and I completely forgot that two of the judges' scorecards were 48-47, and one of them was 47-47. I was anticipating reopening the January UFC results post, fully expecting that there was some sort of outlier 49-46 phantom scorecard, and thankfully didn't happen.
No, but
So
it was one MMA media member, I forget who. But and actually thank you for bringing that up, because that was the one of the talking points that the three of us had when we were rewatching that fight, was the idea of if any of those rounds that were being scored could have been a 10-8 round. And I think Pat and I both agreed no. I don't remember what you said. Because I know, oh right, because you said you were split on one, that maybe one of them could have been.
So speaking of, because we should go back into the vault, I am pulling up the official judges scorecards from UFC 297,
Mm-hmm.
so I can actually see this for myself. So, and just for a bit of added context, there was more Canadian fanfare on this card than I thought. The co-headliner on this card was Raquel Pennington and MBS. I forgot about that.
Yeah, because that was the fight that got, at least in my mind, that got Kayla Harrison signed to the UFC because of how
So,
bad it was. Oh,
so just
by the way, I'm on MMA Decisions now. Combat Press was the outlet that gave a 49-46 for Strickland.
yeah, that's definitely bizarre. Okay, so looking at these scorecards, the three judges scoring this fight, I sound like I'm Bruce Buffer or something like that. But the three judges who scored this fight were Derek Clary, who's obviously judged tons of title fights over the years. He scored the fight 48-47 for Dricus du Plessis. Eric Colin, who I don't know who his work too well. I'm sure you don't either. He scored the fight 48-47. And then, of course, Sal D'Amato, an OG judge of the sport, was the one who actually scored it. Who actually scored it 48-47 in favor of Strickland. So I was mistaken when I thought that there was a draw mixed in here, but it seemed like a pretty
But
clear.
I do remember you on the rewatch with the three of us tempted to give one of the rounds a 10-8 to make it a draw.
Oh yeah, that's right. That's what I was thinking about. Yep.
So that's, I guess, part of the thing that I'm thinking about heading into this fight, is that, it wasn't the most exciting fight, but I'm wondering who is going to make more adjustments. And maybe it's just my DDP bias. I know Sean Strickland had a fight in between, you know, because he didn't get the immediate rematch, even though Dana completely thought that Strickland had won that fight. Um, I think it goes again to my problem with Strickland, Zan. Not that I don't think he's a great fighter, but when you look at the resumes between DDP and Strickland, what they've accomplished in the octagon, both have been middleweight champion now. But if you look at the quality of wins, I'm still going to go with DDP's over Sean Strickland's. The only benefit I can give to Sean Strickland as of this point is, one, the win in his last fight, and number two, how Nasruddin Imavov, as you just said before, knocked out Israel Adesanya, because now I'm one of those people who have to put some respect on Imavov's name.
So you just brought up a great point about resume. So let's actually take a look. So Drake is 2+C going into this fight, 22-2, 8-0 in the UFC, right?
Mm-hmm.
So just taking a look here, just at his last 5 fights alone, okay? Brad Tavares, UFC veteran, Darren Till now doing his thing in Misfits Boxing. Derek Brunson, been around forever, and then 3 straight former champions in Whitaker, Strickland, Adesanya, and then of course he's fighting Strickland this weekend. That to me is a pretty prominent resume as compared to Sean Strickland, who, let's be honest here, has a few questionable wins on his resume. Although you can't really control who you fight all the time, he's at 29-6, 16-6 in the UFC. Been in the UFC about 10 years. Has fought the likes of Paulo Costa, obviously Israel Adesanya. Abus Magomedov was the big question mark for me. That was a big question mark for a lot of people going into
Mm-hmm.
that fight, was how Abus Magomedov, with really no UFC experience whatsoever, was getting a fight of that caliber. And then, of course, he still fought some decent names. He fought Jared Cannonier. He ran into the future light heavyweight champion Alex Pereira. I would actually disagree with you and say that their resumes are actually somewhat similar. So I don't think there's really too many discrepancies. If he would have fought someone like an Abus at some point earlier in his career, where it was that same thing where, a guy like him, didn't have a ton of experience, I would agree with you. But I would have to lean toward the side of that. Actually, I think their resumes are equally similar, maybe minus 1 or 2 fights or so. So
Like I said, I guess part of that is also now I have to give Imavov some respect, because I had a lot of doubts about Imavov truly being top five material, and then all he did last week was just knock out the former longtime middleweight champion in Israel Adesanya.
right, exactly.
So that actually does benefit to Strickland. It's weird how we're looking at other people's wins and losses, and it like affects others, and it definitely affects the outlook of Strickland. I still think that DDP won that first fight, because I think Strickland landed stronger strikes, but I think with Duplessis, he was able to keep up with that pace and ultimately put it to a point where we would sometimes have to look at that fourth criterion of the octagon, which is octagon control. And I think Duplessis was in more of control of the fight than Strickland was.
Yeah, well, I don't know the official octagon control stats, but I would assume that I would assume that when they did populate during portions of that first fight, I'm sure that Duplessis was ahead on almost every sequence, especially later in the fight when the pace started to pick up in rounds 3 and round 4. You obviously had the alleged headbutt, which was actually a major talking point at this week's bigger UFC 312 pre-fight presser, not the Ultimate Media Day they did the day before, but that was a huge point of contention between those two this week. Sean Strickland did clarify that a headbutt of that sort wasn't going to happen again, and Dricus kept it simple and pretty much let Sean do his thing. And then midway through, someone was like, "Oh, Dricus, what's your method of victory going to be, and what's the round going to be?" And he's like, well, all I'm really focused on is winning the fight. But if I were to pick a method of victory, I'm just going to be looking for the knockout the whole fight, whether it comes from round 1 or round 5. So he kept it very simple, very, very direct. And all Strickland wanted to talk about was how he just loved Australia so much that he was gonna that he was gonna go into enemy territory, win the belt, and then celebrate in Australia afterward. So
And the
I
thing
mean,
is,
when I tell you that both of these guys' mindsets could not be more opposite this week, I literally mean it. So it's
fair
it's
enough.
it's very much not just as much from a fight standpoint when you break down the X's and O's of this fight. The psychological differences in this rematch to me are literally no bones about it, undeniable. So I mean,
Absolutely.
I feel like these two were on totally different trajectories. They were meant to meet at some point, and now now they're meeting here. That actually brings me to my prediction too. And I'm just going to be blunt. I don't think a win over Paulo Costa. I mean, I know this might sound controversial, but think about the version of Paulo Costa that Sean Strickland beat last June. It's not the same version of I guess juiced version of Paulo Costa that we saw over COVID fight Israel
I mean,
Adesanya. I
I mean,
think
Zan, I don't think Paulo Costa has really been the same fighter since 2020.
I think a lot of people would agree with you.
I think I know he's had a couple of good performances in the time since, but I don't know, something about, you know, the way that he fought within 2020, the way that he lost to Israel Adesanya in that year. Something about it just, yeah, obviously that was the fight with the whole wine controversy, but I don't know, there was
Right,
just
right.
something wrong there that, like you said, obviously Sean Strickland got the win in that recent fight, but Paulo Costa as your last fight, Israel Adesanya as your last fight. I know what I've told you about Izzy's loss last weekend, that's got to be it for him at the top of the 185, spectrum. But at the same time, he is the former champion, and I think you were going in this direction. You got a former champ versus a guy who really hasn't been the same fighter in about 5 years.
Yeah. That was my overall point too. And this is no disrespect to Sean's eventual performance, but that's a guy you need to finish. That's a guy you don't take to the judges' scorecards and say, "Yeah, I'm happy with that." So he, if it was a more convincing win to get to this fight, it would make me more tempted to pick Strickland. But you mean to tell me that you're asking a guy to go back to Australia again? Nearly 2 years later to try to replicate the same magical performance that he had in September 2023 against a version of Adesanya that, let's be honest, was at the height of his powers. Looked like he was unbeatable after coming back to beat Alex Pereira to reclaim his then middleweight title to become a two-time champion. And look at what Strickland was able to do to him. He outclassed him. I think that these are two totally different circumstances. Dricus Du Plessis has so much momentum right now. The way he was able to essentially dominate Israel Adesanya into that eventual submission win, I don't know. I feel like Du Plessis is on a different level. I just went back and looked at our stats. We both picked DDP the first time. I'm still sticking with him. What about you?
You know I have to stick with him. You know I have to. I'm gonna go with a decision though. Like
Okay, me too.
I know what
That's my
DDP is
that's
saying.
my pick as well.
I
Hmm.
know what DDP is saying about a knockout. And you know what? To that comment that you said mentioned earlier, and actually the one you just said now, I will give DDP credit in that the big concern that I had over the last couple of years as he was entering the upper echelon of middleweight competition was the fact that he was such a finisher as he was rising through the ranks that as the fights got into the later stages, he would get tired. I think, the nose surgery, I think all that he's done. I think he has gotten better in that regard. He looked okay in a fourth round against Israel Adesanya in his last fight. I think hopefully that narrative can now be put to bed. But at the same time, I think Sean Strickland is just a really tough dude that Dricus is probably going to have a hard time trying to finish a guy like a Strickland. Granted, he finished Adesanya, he finished Whitaker. There's just something about Strickland. There's just something about certain fighters that make it hard to finish them. And I think Strickland is in that category. At the same time, I think DDP did enough the first time around, and he'll be able to better make adjustments in this second fight that he should be able to get a clear decision and not so much a close decision as last time.
Okay. And just to clarify, you mean when you say you mean when you say better make adjustments that he'll be able to make those adjustments better in the second fight as he would from the first one? Is that what
Mm-hmm.
you
Yes.
is that what you mean?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. All right. Let's go to the co-main event. Zan, this one has been the toughest one for me to figure out. Because on one hand, Weili Zhang has just been absolutely dominant in the time that she's been a champion.
And
On
not only dominant, in doing my research, because I totally forgot she's been around as long as she has. This is her second strawweight title reign.
Yes, absolutely. She lost the title. She lost the title a couple of years ago, but she
Hmm.
was able to regain it. And I mean, she just continues to develop well as a fighter, even as a champion. On the flip side to it, I mean, Tatiana Suarez then has got the story. She was this rising star, and then at the start of the decade, it's just one deal of injury after another that just completely hampers her momentum. And I want to be able to root for Tatiana and say, she is excellent. And she is excellent, but she's taking on somebody who it's going to be really hard to bet against. I mean, Weili Zhang,
So, so I'm gonna stop you there. You say it's gonna be really hard to bet against. Why do you think Las Vegas is favoring Suarez this weekend? Then
that's a good question. I think it's about maybe the fact that she has had such success with the ground game. But the thing is, Zan, I think that Zhang can match her on the ground. Maybe not so much in terms of grappling power, but I think in terms of defenses, I think in terms of damage, I think she'll be able to sway momentum. And I think her takedown defense is great, way at least.
hmm I think a lot of people would attest to that.
So I think Suarez and the other thing with Suarez, I think as much as we talk about, octagon rust, is it a myth? Is it not? I think it's one thing when you've got Suarez taking on a couple of these rising contenders that are on her level. I think it's another thing when you've got such a dominant champion in front of you.
I mean, I'm just going to ask you this question because I don't think a lot of people have even realized this going into this fight unless you really dig into this. I mean, she's had so many injuries, she's had so many canceled fights. She hasn't fought since August of 2023. I mean, do you think that this was the rightful time to give her the shot, or do you think she should have fought somebody else before taking this dang fight? Because I can understand the argument, and on that side as well, that this was too much of a rushed fight back to where she may look
I
different than
think
how she looked a couple years ago.
agreed, but I think the UFC sees her undefeated record. They have seen, how much time has gone by. And at this point, like you said, they want to rush it out there and get the title fight out.
Well, actually, now that I kind of pull myself back a little bit, I mean to beat to beat former champions in Carla Esparza and and fight someone at the level caliber of Jessica Andrade too. I mean that's pretty darn impressive
But I
right there.
think
And I think that's probably the one reason that pushed them over the edge to say, yeah, it's time for her to get the fight.
okay,
So
but Zen, I'm going to counter with something that has been a talking point when we talk about Tatiana Suarez's resume. Obviously, Carla Esparza, former champion, Jessica Andrade, a former champion. But at the time that she fought them and beat them, can we really say that they were who they once were?
I don't think Grasso we knew yet. The other
Grasso, we
two
didn't.
the other two, I think their years of dominant activity were probably gone by that point. I would I
Right.
would I would say.
So that's why, as much as I like Suarez, I know Vegas is making her the favorite in this one. I have to go with Wei Li to retain. I don't think she'll finish Tatiana. I think this is gonna be a great experience for Tatiana, but I think Wei Li is just too dominant. Now, the one thing I will say for Tatiana that could help brighten her future is we're hearing some rumblings, and Wei Li kind of stirred it a little bit during the media weeks, and about a potential after this fight, she could finally go up to flyweight and finally fight Valentina in that fight we've been waiting for.
Yeah, which would be, I mean, phenomenal. I mean, you want to talk about the biggest international women's fight that you could possibly make. You could do that in any international country in the world. Hell, you could even do that in Bulgaria. You could do that in you could do that in you could do that, and in China you could do it. You could do it anywhere, anywhere internationally, and I think it would sell extremely well. So
Yeah, absolutely. Put that fight anywhere. I mean, the UFC probably isn't going to make it a main event, but I feel like it could be a legitimate main event considering that it is a super fight. So I think if Whaley were to beat Suarez here and then go on to face Valentina at flyweight, then I think you have a real possibility where Suarez, even with a loss here, could be right back in it, potentially in a number one contenders fight or an interim title
well,
fight, depending on what happens with Whaley.
not only even an interim title fight, and not even just the number one contender fight. What if Whaley says, "Oh yeah, I'm going to move up to flyweight, and in fact, I'm just going to vacate. I'm just going to vacate the belt." So,
That's the other thing too, yeah.
mm-hmm.
So
So I think there's multiple possibilities there. I actually like Zhang to win in a late fourth round TKO, and it's when I just think that it's again very similarly to Duplessis. I think her pace is going to be too much for Suarez, and I think it's going to be one of those situations where if Suarez doesn't get her out of there within the first 15 minutes, it's going to be a long fight. I think so.
yeah, for sure, I agree.
Oh, and because I have to do this, of course, Tom. Here's a little trivia for you. You want to know the last time Tatiana Suarez fought on a UFC pay-per-view card?
It wasn't the August 2023 fight. That was a fight night.
Nope.
Was she on a pay per view in early part of 2023 when she came back?
What?
I want to say she was one of those fights in her recent comeback has been on pay per view, right? You're muted.
No, in fact, her
Was
last
it in
two
like
wins.
2019?
Yeah,
She hasn't fought on a pay per view since she was hurt the first time.
yeah, and you want to know where it was?
Oh, let me guess. It was Chicago UFC 238.
Because I was there. Yeah, yeah.
Oh my god, I knew she fought on 238, but I could have sworn one fight that she's had since coming back from her long layoff was a pay-per-view fight.
She hasn't been on pay-per-view in a long time. It's a really long time
Jeez.
ago.
My god. All right, speaking of, oh god, this pay-per-view card. I'm hoping this pay-per-view card gets the UFC Fight Night magic where you look at it and go, "Oh, it sucks," and then it just absolutely delivers because for this fight to be next,
we're saying it. We're saying it, and we'll probably end up doing just that.
because this fight, Zambier next, Justin Tafa, Taliesin Teixeira. I mean, my God, isn't Justin Tafa like 4-3 and Teixeira's like 5-0 or something like that?
So Teixeira's 7-0 and Tafa's 7-4, and Tafa in the UFC is 500. So this is a must win. And,
okay, I was close. I knew he was.
Teixeira was off last year's edition of Contender. That's how you know. That's how you know who that is.
Well, look, when Justin Tafa fights, one of two things happens, Sans. One of two things happens. Either it's a first round knockout victory for Tafa, or he ends up getting tired out and loses in a decision, or gets finished later on in the fight. Teixeira,
I just don't. This is okay. This is what I don't understand. I'm sure you would agree. How does losing to Carl Williams, okay, and this is no disrespect to Carl Williams. Carl Williams is
but in
right.
a decision, in the sloppy decision that it was.
No, I get it. I wasn't.
I'm adding to what you're saying.
Oh, okay. I was gonna say, how does losing to Carl Williams in the fashion that he does reward him a pay-per-view fight the following year?
Then, because the reason these three fights are happening where they are is because Aussie, oi, oi, oi. That's it.
Yeah, that's probably why. You're right.
And you know what the problem with that is? Taliesin Teixeira, he's only had a few fights in his MMA career in total, but most, if not all of them, Zan, have been finishes.
I know.
So I don't know what they're thinking. I know the Tafas and the Tafa brothers are amazing kickboxers, but Teixeira's probably gonna have his way with Tafa. I'm gonna be blunt. I see first round finish for Teixeira.
Yeah, I could see it. Let me see who I have for that. I have it right here. Um yeah, I've got Tafa winning by knockout in the first round also. So,
Wait, you have Tafa?
oh shit. Um
I have
yeah,
Teixeira.
yeah, yeah, I mean, I must have apparently made a mistake. I'll have to, I'll have to go back and fix that. But if I were to somehow not fix it, it would definitely be a Tapology all-time upset. That's really
Wait, are you going Tafa or Teixeira?
okay.
Now I'm confused.
Okay, so um at at as in I think there's something in the Aussie air, and I'm gonna take the upset, but I'm very very much
Now I
anticipating
will
myself to
laugh.
be 100%
Now I
wrong.
will laugh if come Saturday when we do the circles picks, you're flipped over to Teixeira.
Okay.
Uh, Jimmy Crute, Rodolfo Bellato. Look, I think, Zan, it hurts to see what's happened with Jimmy Crute. Yeah, at one point, he got that win over Paul Craig in his UFC debut. He got all that momentum on his side, and now he's winless in his last four. He's like 0-3 and with one no contest since like 2021.
Yeah, I mean, am I crazy to think that Jimmy Cruz is going to lose this fight too? Because I actually have him. I actually have him losing.
I have him losing as well.
Yeah,
I think Bellator has gotten a strong. He's
a
gotten a
strong
pretty decent
start.
start.
He only has one fight. So
Yeah, he's on a strong start, and I think this is actually going to help him. Also, how funny that the UFC is booking a guy who has a last name that's one letter off from its former competitor after its former competitor has basically been dissolved.
good point.
I just had to throw that out there. Uh, Jake Matthews versus Francisco Prado. I like Jake Matthews. I
I
I
do
I
too.
I have no problem with this being a decision win for him. I think he's, for what I predict about Teixeira, I mean Tafa Teixeira and Crute Bellato, I think Jake Matthews is going to get a win for the Aussie crowd on this pay-per-view.
Yeah, I actually like Matthews by finisher. I'm taking him to win in the second round by TKO, but I could easily see a decision in this fight.
All right. So those are our picks for UFC 312 for the main card. Can't wait to see what this one is like, as much as it's not exactly the highest quality of card.
No, it's not. You are a few fights better than me going into this weekend, so it should be an interesting one. So we'll see.
All right, let's get to some fight news. And unfortunately, in spite of what we talked about on the pilot about Alvarez versus Canelo Alvarez, that is, versus Bud Crawford, looking like it's going to be finalized. Of course, Dan Rafael is just having his way with people on social media right now because he hates those reports. Well, apparently, Zan, our old buddy, Rick Blazer, is saying, no, no, no. The negotiations are now off. And Canelo is now eyeing a fight with, of all people, Jake Paul.
Yeah, this is an interesting one, and I guess I'll say this. Hopefully Canelo got paid, because if he's getting paid what even the numbers I'm thinking he got paid, which I don't even know what he got paid. I don't really think anybody will ever know what Canelo is potentially getting paid for this. It's got to be worth his while, because no one just actively calls out Jake Paul like that. Canelo, I've never even heard him mention Jake Paul,
No.
let alone even see if this fight was being considered. But now it apparently is, with the Crawford fight no longer potentially happening as it seems.
And it's kind of sad.
That's the confusing part about it.
And it's kind of sad because this was a fight a lot of people wanted to see. Bud Crawford, I had questions about if this fight was legitimately going to happen after his last fight because
I
I
think
don't
we
know.
both did.
All three of us
Because
did. I remember sitting with Pat doing an episode right after that because I don't think you were there, and Pat and I agreed, like, obviously it's the money fight to make, but Bud Crawford in his last title defense looked awful. Absolutely
Hmm.
awful. And, the boxing purists are going to hate losing the fight between Alvarez and Crawford for Alvarez and Paul. And I mean, I kind of hate it. But this is where I have to swallow my pride. Because as you mentioned, with a Jake Paul fight, because again, the Paul brothers are crossover figures. They are YouTubers turned to combat fighters, which means you're not just going to have combat sports fans watching this fight. You're also just going to have those who are Paul brother fans watching this fight. I mean, the Paul brothers, Zan, now are going to have a new reality show, supposedly, about, their time training and fighting and such. They've teased fights with one another. And of course, you got Canelo's popularity as one of the greatest boxers of all time. Like, I hate it. I hate losing Canelo versus Crawford in favor of Canelo versus Jake Paul. But if Canelo, as you said, is getting paid a handsome amount for it,
Which he
given
probably is.
given the status of those two and the
I mean, this
popularity of
was
those
probably one
two,
of those paydays where Canelo may even consider retiring afterward. Which honestly, I wouldn't blame him for it. I really wouldn't.
I wouldn't blame him for it. But now that this Canelo Crawford fight has been teased, like right out in front of us and pulling back, I feel like I would want to see Canelo versus Crawford happen at least one time
I just
before.
wonder what happened because it was like literally in a matter of hours that it
It was
really.
it was at the finish line, it seemed.
Yeah, that is. Oh my goodness! I bet
So
you the biggest loser in this one is Crawford.
yes, absolutely.
So I don't know. It's very interesting. It's also
Hold on.
very interesting that Netflix may be involved in this fight too potentially. So that's
Hmm.
another. I'm sure that was another factor that made Netflix go, "Oh yeah, we'll do it." So
So Zan, and I do this as a question for the first time. Like I actually had inserted a question, but I throw this banner up in the combat exchange era for the first time. Boxing gets it's not, and once again, boxing gets in its own way. Considering what you said with Netflix and the paydays and stuff, it's like I'm actually asking, and for the first time, boxing gets in its own way.
yeah, it's very weird, isn't it?
It is insanely weird. But you know what's weirder, Zan? Dana White may finally be getting into the boxing business.
Yeah, well, the reports he said a couple of weeks ago, months ago, whenever that was, were pretty mature. Um, who's pretty mature now? Because it looks like this thing might actually happen. So
The demise of Zuffa boxing as we know it may have been like you said, those calls may have been premature
yeah,
because he's teaming up with what I'll call his turkey buddy.
yeah. So I have a feeling this is just a guess, and this is coming from someone who is a obsessive fan of this platform that I'm about to say. But I feel like the TKO Boxing League is Fight Pass written all over it.
Potentially.
I feel like if Fight Pass needs an avalanche of content, they just throw this on there a couple times a month.
Maybe
And
for smaller cards, because I feel like you know with the UFC's partnership with Saudi Arabia, etc. I feel like TKO is going to end, and with TKO, I feel like it's going to end up on a major platform in some regard, at least for major fights and pay-per-view outings. The question,
I just don't even know which fighters they would even remotely get.
well, here's the one. That's my question. I mean, that I have two questions. One is that. The other is how are they going to operate in the current boxing landscape? Because you've had
Or maybe strictly they just won't, and they'll operate exclusively with the pool that they have and say screw everybody else.
that's the only way I can think of it because Dana hates cross promotion, but guess what? To get some of the title fights that we get in boxing, there's cross
Or
promotion.
maybe he'll only just work with the promoters he actually likes, which are only Frank Warren and Eddie Hearn, and that's it. So
That's a possibility as well because then the questions are, you know, like boxing is not what MMA is because MMA you've got the organizations that have their champions.
right,
Boxing you've got the independent sanctioning bodies who are determining champions and fights and such. Dana would hate to be in that kind of environment.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think that's one of the reasons why when he tells the media, he goes on these calls and then he hangs up and he goes, "What the hell am I doing?" So
That's why, we have this push for the Ali Act to be, in MMA. As long as Dana White has power, and I hate getting political here, but considering who now just got back into the White House, yeah, that's not happening for several years at minimum.
well, no, and Dana even admitted on a recent podcast interview that he won't be retiring anytime soon. So he'll be
Yeah,
uh
as
he'll
long
be
as
pro- he'll be promoting fights by the time I'm 50 something, and by the time you're in your 70s, or 80s, he might some version of him might still be around. You never know.
I
A
know
really a really really a really old version of him.
my point being was, as long as A, he's in charge of the UFC, and at least for now, B, Donald Trump is president of the United States, whether that's 4 years or now he's trying to push for another term, the Ali Act is not going into MMA. So, how that is going to affect a TKO Boxing League being launched in the fall, supposedly, I just don't know how they're going to operate.
I don't know either, but I guess that's what the intrigue of what this could look like really means. And
Well, the
hey,
boxing bodies, Zan,
with
the boxing bodies have been having meetings about what to do when this league actually pops up.
yeah,
Mauricio, Suleiman, and all of them at the WBC, WBA, they're all been having meetings trying to figure out what the heck this could mean.
yeah, that's going to be interesting. Well, I guess I could say the spearheaded this thing is probably going to be Callum Walsh, but that's just a wild, relatively good. I would say it's a relatively good guess. But we'll see though. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
We say this every year that something like this is going to happen, and then it never happens. So I don't know.
Oh, speaking of something that might never happen, speaking of how are things going to be structured, hey, it's GFL time. So,
Wow.
the last time when we did our pilots in, the GFL did not have its draft yet. Then it had its draft stream. Oh boy. Oh, that was terrible to watch. That was painful to watch. They promoted it as a live draft stream and they tried to do it all NFL draft style. They go through 4 rounds or 5 rounds and then they absolutely give up and just release the teams, even though it's supposed to be a live draft. Then just a mess. And then you had, what was it, the Rashad Evans stuff, the Rampage Jackson Rashad Evans stuff, where everyone's like, hey, what happened to the fight we're supposed to have in April? Yeah, these guys just they put me out there on their roster without consent, and now you got the cities, and the GFL just released a schedule. So basically, the 6 cities with the 6 teams, one city is going to hold the events in each month. So April's going to have one city, May's going to have one city, et cetera, et cetera. I just find it very interesting, Zan. And you can talk about, anybody out there can talk about my PFL bias, that aside. I find it very interesting that about a month after the PFL releases the news of their restructuring of how the tournaments are going to work, because they were seasons, now it's just going to be the tournaments, and how it's going to go April, June, and August as part of their restructuring. Here's the GFL weeks later, weeks after its draft and weeks after that PFL announcement. Oh, we're going to do April, May, June, July, August, September. To make reference to what you said before about what Mr. Owen said about, as the NFL is in its offseason. Really? I'm sorry. This, Zan, to me, feels like a ripoff of the PFL. Now, I know it sounds hypocritical for me to say, because I was one of those that didn't mind the PFL's unique season playoff format, but I'll acquiesce and say it wasn't popular with a lot of people, and they made adjustments based on it after dissolving Bellator. But then for the GFL to come in and just do a complete ripoff and take that format and somehow make it worse. Like, I'm sorry. I have no faith in this league. I have no faith in the people behind it. We still have no clear understanding of how it's going to work. As Zan drops for some reason, to me, it's baffling how this organization is even going to function. I just don't get it. And considering the status of some of these fighters and them saying, oh, I was out of this league without consent. I mean, if that's an issue, like, I'm sorry, if that happened with one fighter, what does it say about some of the contracts about the rest of the fight? Hell, one day after the draft stream, one of the fighters that was mentioned as part of the GFL teams was competing on the PFL card in Dubai. I don't get this. What kind of pony circus are they trying to pull over us? I really would like to figure out how things are going to be over there, because I have a lot of doubts about the functionality of this promotion. That's just my opinion.
So yeah, I mean, I would love to see this league work, but again, as I've alluded to you several times, we don't need another reincarnation of the IFL 20 years later. This is what it feels like. The team format didn't work the first time. You have fighters saying the GFL allegedly signed that they never did. Like, that is the worst. That to me is the worst look possible, and I haven't really seen any accountability about that. And again, I'm one of these proponents to the fact that I want to see this league work. But when they keep shooting themselves in the foot, even before having a card, it's not good news. And again, fighting isn't professional football. You can't have multiple events in the same day. I mean, I guess you could in some respects if they're in multiple cities, but I think
Right.
it's very bizarre. I don't know.
But this isn't WrestleMania 2, where we have three smaller cards to make up one big card. It just, like you said, it doesn't work. I know the PFL had the MENA championships and the World Championships within, the same day, but they made that as kind of all one big full day card that began
Right.
early in the morning and ended during the evening hours here in America, where it would just ran for basically the whole day. Like, there's a difference between what the PFL did for its world championships back in November and what, like you said, what the GFL might be trying to do.
Exactly. Exactly. Well said.
All right. Big news about the UFC antitrust settlement. The $375 million settlement with fighters in the Kung Lee case, that is now out there. It is now official, and the fighters are being told, go get your money. Do I think they could have gotten more? I mean, it's definitely not the number that they were looking for. Now, as far as what's to happen with contracts, nothing has changed with UFC contracts, but that's what the Johnson portion of the antitrust case is happening. Those fighters are fighting for changes to UFC contracts, I guess earlier sunset clauses, giving them more wiggle room and allowing for better compensation for fighters and benefits for fighters.
Yeah, I mean, this is something we've wanted to see for a while, and I feel like this needed to happen, and I hope that the fighters feel comfortable with what they deserve. I'm sure it doesn't take away from the suffering they had to go through over the last decade to get
No,
the money that they so rightfully deserve. But at least it's resolved to an extent. I just worry it's not going to change much.
that's my fear. And my fear is that the Johnson case is gonna either be easily settled or thrown out or anything like that to, like I said, stop what could be big stuff for fighters.
Exactly.
Uh, Going over just one other big story. We have plenty of other stories to talk about, but here's one other big story. ESPN Plus lost 700,000 subscribers in the final period of 2024. that doesn't sound like a big deal. Why that's important in the MMA space, but ESPN, of course, is the television provider here in the U.S. for the Ultimate Fighting Championship. And right now, UFC, their TV rights are up, and they're the last big sports broadcasting television rights deals that are going to be around for a number of years. And right now, ESPN is in the middle of a negotiating window. So, I mean, Zan, when you're seeing that number of loss of subscribers, you're seeing, the early Windows stuff that's been going on with the UFC pay-per-views for the last year, and that hasn't stopped. And I think even pardon me, a month or two ago, you had it basically extended for a bit, into the week. You see what's going on there, also combined with the success that the UFC's partners with TKO over at the WWE have been having with Netflix, how successful the NFL broadcasts were on Netflix during Christmas, and Netflix potentially being involved in, like we mentioned, another boxing fight with potentially Canelo Jake Paul.
Right.
To me, it seems like Netflix has a lot of the momentum that I'm thinking that, maybe they still do a split like we originally talked about it when it came to the pilot episode, but feels like a lot of momentum is on Netflix's side, even during a time where ESPN's the only one negotiating with the UFC.
Mm-hmm. So that's something that you made a great point about, and I think one of the reasons why ESPN Plus subscriber numbers are down so much is because of the constant complaints on social media about the pay-per-view feeds, the purchasable ones, if you will, just not working when they're supposed to work.
Yeah,
That I think is one reason.
the price
Second
hikes aren't
reason,
helping.
second reason um is customer service just not understanding what the consumer
Oh,
wants. Like
you've had experiences with customer service.
I sure have, and they're not really directly related to me. They're just general questions. Like I remember calling them and asking, like, "Hey, like, there's this Tyson Fury boxing match coming up. It was Fury Ngannou," and the person on the other end was like, oh yeah, that's free." I'm like, "Are you sure about that?" So I just like, and it wasn't even remotely a test. I was genuinely curious. Where else can you see this fight other than DAZN? I figured that ESPN would have the answer. Apparently, they didn't. So I don't know. Like I feel like customer service is one key thing, and two, people aren't willing to pay the money they were used to paying before, and now the stream isn't guaranteed to work, so people aren't willing to risk it. So
Absolutely not.
you're one of those people that does though. So I commend you for that in that regard, but a lot of people don't. So and
And
and I'm just curious because I haven't asked you this in a few months. As of recently, have you not had any issues with your experience or no?
lately, no. Lately, no. So
Okay.
I feel safe about that. You probably just jinxed me for Saturday, though.
All right. Fair enough.
um, but yeah, no, my opinion has not changed from when we talked about it on the pilot episode, Sam. My prediction at this point, I think ESPN retains some of the UFC broadcasting, like with the pay-per-views, but I think you're going to see a majority of UFC stuff, including fight night cards, go over to Netflix.
So you could see that?
Yes, absolutely.
Really? That's interesting.
I think Zan, it's more likely if I have to pick with one or the other, but the split is my main prediction. But if I had to go with all these rankings, then I would rank the idea of UFC completely leaving ESPN for Netflix higher than the idea of UFC completely staying with ESPN like they had the last few years.
I could see that, but I could also see ESPN wanting to be involved though, because they're still the worldwide leader in sports, and the
Correct.
UFC, I'm sure, makes them more money than we even reportedly know about. So,
I'm sure. I'm sure Dana still hates though that he's basically sharing a platform with PFL.
oh, I'm sure of that too.
All right. All right, we still have some more news to do, so PTI style, big finish.
Okay.
All right, Ilya Tapura is basically saying that he is open. So Ilya's been in the media space for a little bit as of late because his brother is going to be fighting on this weekend's card.
Yeah,
In the prelims.
Alexandre Topuria. It should be interesting. He's on the undercard and he's fighting a relatively unknown kid that apparently is supposed to be pretty decent. So it should be interesting. And Topuria even predicted that his brother would be a world champion within 3 to 4 years. So
Well, speaking of champion like Tapuri is, he's been talking about fighting Islam Makhachev. Now, in recent months, ever since knocking out Holloway, he has had the tease of potentially moving up to 155 pounds and even vacating the featherweight title to go after the lightweight title. To which I say, I love how he's dreaming big, but I would like to see the Tapuria Volkanovski rematch that's not been officially announced, but is like in that swirling stage that it could be announced. Plus, Zan, I mean, you've also got Diego Lopez, you got Movsar Ivalev, you've got Yair Rodriguez. There's guys there that I would like to see Ilya Tapura defend the title against before he moves up to 155 pounds.
yeah, same here. I think a lot of people would agree with that. But just the intrigue of even the possibility of this super fight is just astronomical. So, um, you want to talk about two guys with two interesting personalities, two guys that have taken over the MMA world by storm, two guys with a combined one loss in their professional careers. It's as elite of a fight as you could possibly get, as close to undefeated versus undefeated in a title fight that you could possibly get. And it's a fight that I'm sure a lot of people wouldn't hate. So
I
I'm gonna
wouldn't hate
say
it.
I'm
I'm
gonna
not
say
saying I hate it. I would feel bad for the guys that are right
oh
there
no
in
no
the
no no no.
contender spot.
I know. I'm just saying, but if the UFC made it, I think more people would like it than not. So
I agree. I would just saying I would feel bad for like Lopez and Evalev who are like right there at the doorstep of a title opportunity.
right, for sure. And but having said that, though, it's not like at least one of those two guys isn't going to ever get an opportunity. It may just not be the opportunity that they were initially expecting. So
Fair enough. Speaking of title opportunities, so former title challenger Brandon Royval is hurt. There was going to be this big fight between Royval and Kopp at UFC Vegas 103. I'm really disappointed now because I was really looking forward to that fight.
I think a lot of people were.
And now Kopp is going to face Asu Almabayev in the main event of that card, which, I mean, still a fine fight for a flyweight fight, but still, Royval versus Kopp was the better fight. Now, that being said, if Kopp were to win this fight, Sam, and considering Brandon Royval just had this injury now, does that put Kopp in the driver's seat for a flyweight title fight?
I think it very well could. What do you think?
I think if Kopp has a strong performance in this fight, I don't see how you can't make him the next title challenger to Pantoja.
Hmm. I mean, I think personally, I mean, personally, I think it's almost like a crazy backdrop because, as you know, the Apex fight I went to, Rayvel versus Tyra had a lot of heat on it. Obviously,
Mm-hmm.
Rayvel's not fighting, but this is almost one of those fights where it's the fight that could have been the fight, so to speak, because Rayvel is now out. So it's almost like if you're Rayvel, you're almost like in a lose-lose situation because could you imagine if Adebayo actually looks good and potentially leapfrogs one of those guys, then you have a problem.
Right.
So
Plus, I almost forgot Kai Kara France is still in the mix after his win. There's rumors that he could be fighting Pantoja next for the belt.
right, exactly. Yeah, that's
So
interesting.
So I think it really depends on if one of these two guys is able to get a big finish against the other. Then then it's going to be an interesting case. Like if he wins this fight by a big finish and Pantoja retains against Kai Kara France, I'm really interested to see if the UFC's instinct is to run back Royval versus Kopp, or if Kopp is just going to get the title shot right after that.
I don't think you can do. I don't think Cobb can get a title shot um, unless he fights the guy that should have beat the guy, so to speak.
Fair enough. Jairzinho Rosenstrike, really bad performance in last weekend's card, and as a result, he was cut by the UFC with 3 fights still remaining on his contract.
Yeah, that's a bummer. I feel bad for him, but it seems like he was gracious in his Instagram post. It seems like he understood where the UFC was coming from. I just think the fight was so bad that the UFC probably thought, "Oh, we put them in here again." I think it was more of like how are the fans going to react than anything else,
And it
which is probably why they ended up cutting ties. I'm sure it was not. I'm sure it was not an easy decision. I'm
no.
sure they've worked very well with him based on like what he wrote in the post and stuff.
Hmm.
I'm sure it was one of those that they debated about for quite some time before actually doing it.
And I mean, to the UFC's defense, unfortunately, Rosenstrike had that great rookie season in 2019, going 4-0, 5-0 before that loss to Francis Ngannou to start his 2020. But ever since that Ngannou loss, he's basically been 500 in the octagon.
Mm-hmm,
He's
for
definitely
sure.
been, he's definitely been out of the upper echelon ranks of the UFC's heavyweight division, but the UFC's heavyweight division, Zan, is only down to like 30 something fighters. It's a
It's
little
pretty
less than
wild.
half that are ranked. Like, that's concerning.
Mm-hmm. It's not the heavyweight division it once was. I'll tell you that.
No. That's why, like, this Jones Aspinall fight has to happen. Just
Mm-hmm.
because there's no other great fights at heavyweight right now.
No, there isn't. Which, by the way, it's good to see that Dana walked his will move on from Jones Aspinall because I'm sure he said that, and I'm sure people told him, you can't, you can't say that. You're the same guy that's hyped up as potentially the biggest fight in UFC history. You got to make it. So now, when you listen to him this week, he's going in all these podcast interviews who's saying, "Yeah, I'm doing everything I can in my power to make sure that the fight does happen." So that's the
Absolutely.
interesting part about it.
Uh, Here's another interesting thing, Zan, that possibly could be you know really brightening your day as a Midwesterner. UFC Kansas City is rumored for April 26th, and then they're going to stay in the Midwest supposedly the next weekend to go to Des Moines, Iowa.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this. I don't think I'm going to be able to make it to back shows, but I can tell you right here, right now, you will at least see me. You will at least see me at one of them. That's for that's for sure. I just like how there's Midwest representation, and I've seen people in the comments say, "Oh, how does Iowa get a card before Chicago?" I'll actually give this one to Iowa a little bit, just considering they haven't been back to Iowa since UFC 21. So I think Iowa gets a little bit of slack, but Kansas City, they were just in Kansas City 2 years ago. Think they could try out some other Midwest markets. Maybe I would have passed on Kansas City for this time of year, considering it's still kind of cold. Or at that point, it's still early May, so the weather around this area, I guess, is a little unpredictable at that point. Well, it's more so late April because that's a late April date, assuming that that date stays intact. But I do think going to back Midwestern cities is very interesting. And I think they could probably if these fights go well and the tickets sell out and stuff, which I'm sure that these tickets will because these aren't two major markets like a Vegas or like a Newark or like a Madison Square Garden. If these events do well, I'm sure that they'll probably consider doing these back to back tours where they're in the same region 2 weekends in a row. And I think a lot of people wouldn't hate it. So yeah.
Probably. Uh,
What do you think? What do you think about it?
I mean, I just feel great for Iowa because, like you said, it's been decades since they've had a UFC card.
Hmm.
Decades since they've had one. I
Well,
mean,
not only has it been decades, it'll literally be almost 25 years to the week of their last UFC event.
the
So,
last time the UFC was there, the UFC was still trying to find its footing, basically.
well,
Before
yeah, it didn't even Zuffa didn't even own the company. It was
we were
still under,
we were still in the dark ages at that point.
yeah. Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Now they'd be going to a little bit of a bigger city in Des Moines. So assuming they can get tons of Midwest talent on that card, should be very very interesting. And the rumored arena for that event is an arena I've been to for college basketball. And I'll tell you what, you can bring anything to Wells Fargo. That's what it's called. You can bring anything there. Bull riding, fighting, college basketball. Will sell out every single time. I expect that if this Iowa date stays, that card will sell out in literal minutes, if not even under an hour. So I I think the anticipation from the Midwest audience, if you will, is going to be palpable. And if it's anything like the event that I went to in St. Louis last year, it's gonna be nuts. So we'll see how it goes. I just it's the only thing I'm curious about is who you would even remotely headline on that card, is considering that there's no major Iowa superstars at the moment. But as long as you could get a Midwest talent like a Curtis Blades or something like that, somebody like a name that people know from the region, I think it could do okay. So
I think so too. All right, one last story. All right, it's very rare for us to talk about kickboxing on the show, and I hate ending our shows.
super rare, but given the prominence of who he is, we felt like we couldn't ignore it.
Yeah, and I hate ending shows on a down note, but unfortunately, we got to talk about it. Badr Hari being arrested and an alleged assault on his ex-girlfriend. Taking a reading from Beyond Kick, the kickboxing website, local authorities confirmed that they have detained 40-year-old Hari following a reported altercation at the residence of his ex while he was dropping their 5 children off for a visitation arrangement. Hari remains detained as of a couple of days ago under formal suspicion of assault, with prosecutors expected to determine charges in the coming days. The arrest marks the latest in a string of legal battles for the former kickboxing superstar, whose career has been repeatedly sidelined by off-canvas controversies, including prior convictions for assault and public disturbances. He is the bad boy of kickboxing. That's what they call him. But something like this, I mean, Zan, it's hard, as the years go on. He's had a couple of injuries and, like I said, other legal controversies that have sidelined him for longer. But, the guy is 40 years old. And
Yeah.
I know sometimes age can be a number in this sport, but when you're 40 years old and now you got something like this hanging over your head, I mean, I just don't know. It already looks like Hari isn't the same guy in terms of being a fighter that he once was,
No, it doesn't seem like it.
and I don't know if he's really going to ever fight again or have anything big after something like this.
Yeah, I don't really see where he goes from here, assuming this is true. This could be a career ender for him, and it sucks because people in the kickboxing community like Badr Hari a lot. He's been a guy who's been around forever, and he's had some very iconic performances. But this is just one of those where you can't stomach anything remotely to the worst of this degree, and here we are. So I don't know. It's almost like one of those things where it's like, just what could have been. So
Yeah, absolutely. All right, that's going to do it for this edition of the Combat Exchange. Again, make sure to follow us on X at Combat Exchange. Follow us on Instagram at the Combat Exchange. Of course, on Saturday, we'll be dropping our picks, our circles, if you will, for UFC 312. We'll be live tweeting for UFC 312, so should be fun. Enjoy the fights this weekend. Football fans, enjoy the Super Bowl this weekend. Zan, it should be a fun weekend of sports to watch.
it certainly will be. I'm looking forward to it. Obviously, with the fights on Saturday and with the Super Bowl. Tom, I understand this isn't a football show, but I would be remiss if I didn't ask you: are you picking the Chiefs or are you picking the Eagles on Sunday to bring home the Lombardi Trophy?
I'm going to go for the three-peat. I think at this point it's just going to be really hard to beat the Chiefs, whether you're siding with the referees or not.
Agreed. Agreed.
All right, so that's my pick.
I'm
But
picking
yeah,
I'm picking the Chiefs too, 24-20.
I am going to say a little higher scoring of a game. I'm going to say something like 30-24.
Okay.
All right. Enjoy the fights this weekend, everybody. That's Zan. I'm Tom. We'll see you next time on the Combat Exchange.
Have a good one, everyone.
Take care.